Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today we're doing another viewer-requested video, this time top 10 mean games. Although I'm slightly going to adjust that term to cutthroat games because, well, let's talk about what types of games are going to be included and not. In general, there are lots of games that can be abundantly mean, but I don't want to include just games that are mean for the sake of mean or games that have feel-bad moments. I'm specifically trying to include my top 10 cutthroat games. Games that do have cutthroat moments, moments where you feel a complete lack of being a good person as you take that move that's going to eliminate the other person in some way, shape, or form, that's going to undercut them entirely, ruin their plans. I'm specifically looking for games that I do feel that feel-good aspect of gameplay where strategically we're all in it, we're all invested, we're all having a good time, but there's certainly a large degree of cutthroat play at play. For me, there are other games that I'm not necessarily including that do fall a bit more under the category of mean, games that have actual feel-bad moments, and obviously this is going to be very subjective. But for example, I think the generally regarded as the most mean or fighting game of all time is going to be Diplomacy. Diplomacy is one of those games that has a reputation for ruining friendships as you lie, backstab, and betray, and it does so in a long enough experience that it's not always a feel-good moment where it's like, well, you won and you tricked me, but it actually has a moment of, well, you really ruined my plans and you really ruined this 8-hour-long experience, and so I'm trying to avoid those types of experiences. I'm also avoiding, I'll give you some 2 honorable mentions over here. Here's 2 honorable mentions of arguably very, very good games, but that I personally find do lean a bit too much into that meanness and aren't going to be on this video over here. And one will be Dominant Species, where every single thing you do can completely and totally undercut everything that species has been working towards in the game, and really can have some really real feel-bad moments in it. And another one, a game that's actually led to fighting at my table, which is very rare. There's been like 2 or 3 games across 12 years, more than that, what are we at now? 2024, across 13 years of being in this hobby, there's only been 2 or 3 times where there's actually been tension at the table. One of those is in this video, which might undermine a bit of what I'm saying, but I think that was more of a player situation. There were 2 people who already didn't love each other, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it when we get to it. But there have only been a handful of times across my 13 years in this hobby where actual tension, actual frustration and fighting has been present at the table. One of those times was in Tammany Hall, which will not be on this video. Tammany Hall certainly has the ability to make anyone at the table really go at it. It really does have people who are just deciding to forego any sense of relationship for the sake of the game, and it happens way too often. Nothing Personal, ironically, designed by Tom Vassell, Nothing Personal, ironically, once had a very, very personal moment in the game, although situational. Those aren't on this list. For me, these are all games, with one exception, although again, I think that was a player issue. For me, these are all games that have cutthroat play. It's not mean for the sake of being mean. It's not, well, most things aren't mean for the sake of being mean, they're just mean. But it's not mean, it's cutthroat. There's degrees of, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you took that move that undercut what I was working for. But usually, or at least at my table, has generally not resulted in any tension outside of like wishing you had adjusted your gameplay to plan around that happening. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive into my top 10. I will say, some of these I don't have the game boxes for on my table. Some of these I no longer own, but they still provide that experience. And so we're going to start off with number 10. Number 10 is one that's actually on the way out. I just haven't gotten rid of it yet. But this has been in my collection for a very, very long time, and that's Sheriff of Nottingham. And I will say, I do have these ranked in terms of going through them 10 to 1, with 1 being what I view as the most cutthroat, and 10 being the least cutthroat. And Sheriff of Nottingham kind of straddles that line for me. I debated whether to include this on the list because it's not necessarily cutthroat play in a typical sense, but rather it does have you lying to the sheriff's face every single minute of the game, and then trying to figure out whether the sheriff's going to completely open up the bag, ruining the plans for both of you, or alternatively trying to find a win-win situation at the table. The general premise of the game is that players are trying to get their goods past the Sheriff of Nottingham. The problem is, if you only sneak legal goods, then you won't get in trouble, but you don't often have as much potential earnings. Whereas if you choose to sneak contraband past the sheriff, then you have the potential for higher earnings, but if the sheriff catches you and looks in your bag, you'll lose all the things that you were going for, which means it really results in a much tenser situation as far as trying to figure out how you're going to try to get past the sheriff and what you're going to try to do. This results in a little bit of bribery as you talk to the sheriff and convince him not to look in your bag, and if he looks in your bag when there's only legal goods, he'll pay you a penalty, but otherwise you'll end up losing things and paying penalties along the way, which inevitably results in this delicate balance of either lying, bluffing, or finding that win-win where you both can walk away benefiting from the goods you are trying to smuggle into the city. It results in fascinating tension, constant little, like this little clip on the bags as you try to figure out whether they open or not, and it really has those moments of cutthroat gameplay as players sit there and say, I understand what you're offering me, but unless you move it higher, unless you give me more, I'm going to walk away. And then you have players swearing up and down, no, I guarantee you, if you open that bag, sure, you'll catch me, I don't even care, but you'll gain more from what I offer you. And you frequently have those moments. Those moments are why I included here. You'll have moments where one player is sitting there saying, you will benefit more if you just take my bribe. And the sheriff's like, I know, but you'll lose, and so I'm going to sit there and torture us both into the ground, refusing to agree unless you cave, and someone is going to have less of a fun time at the table. This is a delightful game. It has moments of over-the-top, just in each other's faces, moments of over-the-top negotiation. It's been in my collection for a very long time for a very good reason. This is Sheriff Notingham from Arcane Wonders, from Dice Tower Essentials. I think Simon currently publishes the current version of it, but that's Sheriff of Notingham, our number 10. Number 9 is the one that I have had that moment of tension. We'll talk about the game, and I'll talk about the moment of tension, but this is Carson City, which is a very heavy box. Carson City, from Xavier Georges, from, Quinette or whatnot. This is a worker placement game in which you can place workers where someone else already went. It just means that there's going to be a shootout, and you'll see who actually gains the benefit of the location. So in traditional worker placement games, you place a worker, oh, you got that spot, I'll go somewhere else. In this game, no, I can go where you are, we're just going to have a shootout, which means inherently, as soon as I go to a spot, somebody else can go there. It's just going to result in someone not getting what they want. That little delightful bit right there already introduces a degree of tension, of cutthroatness to the gameplay, but it's further magnified by the fact that you can take actions to improve your ability to win a shootout. So as soon as I know that combat's happening, I can start prepping for it. Oh, look at that, I have a few guns with me this round. Oops, what can I do with those? And so you can have this moment of taking away the worker placement action that somebody else is going for in the game. Now, it's not that punishing because you at least get your workers back, so you won't have them this round, but you'll have them next round to take another action. And you do get stronger as your workers lose these battles as they go to your ranch or whatnot, and they're available to back up everyone else. So you can't lose that many, or you probably won't lose that many battles in any single round. But it does introduce both tension and cutthroat gameplay, especially as you start to realize that the way to win the game is to look at the person who's currently winning and start trying to figure out how to shoehorn in on their territory. Hey guys, if we all start going where Alex is, if we just start taking the income from his buildings, he can't fight all of us and win, so we'll all walk away. Some of us will win, some of us will lose, but we'll be better off, and that person who's winning the game, he probably won't win the game anymore, so why don't we go ahead and start edging in on his territory. This results in absolutely delightful tension as players work around that, as players take roles that support that, as players go to worker placement spots that give them more ways to win at their game, or to win those gunfights. It really is a fascinating worker placement game. That one incident I had was one time there were two people who at my game table, going in, they already didn't love each other. I shouldn't have let a game happen with both of them there. They were already not the best of friends. Someone did go on someone else's territory, and the other person decided to go after the first person for the rest of the game. Neither of them won. The table was tense the rest of the night, and I did try to avoid having the two of them at a shared game night ever again. I already knew going in that they were... I probably shouldn't have... Honestly, this is my fault. I probably shouldn't have picked this game, knowing they were both there. It is what it is. You live and you learn. Anyways, going on to our number 8 over here. Number 8 I don't have on the table with me, unfortunately, but it's Arboretum. Arboretum is both a kind, peaceful game in theory, but it's really delightfully tense and cutthroat as you play through it, because only one player actually scores for each of the set of trees. Now that's going back a little, let's take a step back over here. The general idea of the game is you're going to be trying to gather sets of trees and place them down to create these little patterns. So you're creating a little arboretum, you create this little nice pathway. So if I have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of a certain color, I'll get a whole bunch of points because I have a little ascending order pathway of those cards. Now, there's a bunch of ways the cards score, from ascending orders, from having the 1, having the 8, the highest and the lowest, having all the same color, having sequential. There's all these different things you can do to improve your scoring, except for one small fatal flaw. You only actually score if you have the highest amount of that color in your hand, which means I'm sitting here building out the perfect pathway of poplar trees or whatnot, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna score like 14 points in this set of poplar trees. That's delightful. Except that jerk at the table is holding the 8 in his hand, and he knows it, and he's like, I'm never giving this up. I see your perfect pathway, but I'm just not going to let you score for it. Will I score for it? No, but I'm not letting you score 14 points off a single set of trees if I can just hold this one card in my hand. And that concept happens throughout the game. You're sitting there building out this perfect scoring paradigm, but then you watch the whole entire thing fold and collapse as other people are holding the high cards of those colors in their hand, stopping you from being able to score. It is a game that is as peaceful as it is cutthroat, and it's a delightfully fun one to play. Coming in number 7, we have Barrage from Cranial Creations. Barrage is another one where you watch players build up their plans, and then through a simple act of rediverting the water, you completely change the entire ecosystem of the landscape. This is a game about generating power. It's from Cranial Creations, and the general idea is you're trying to set up these set of dams, and trying to have the water flow down through the dams, trying to set up the dams and the power converters, so as the water flows through the dams, it powers things up, and you can earn and generate power, which is a great concept. Lots of planning goes into it, and that's where everything falls apart, because you can divert water very easily. Plug up a few dams, and things don't fall over. Redirect some other stuff, and things just start moving around the board. Drop a little more water there, steal the power at the source, and you can watch players build entire infrastructures that will help and support them, and then completely undercut them in the game, forcing them to pivot or adjust, possibly trying to undercut you right back. There's only so high you can go up the totem pole of water, though, as it flows down the mountain, and this gives you a delightfully strategic gameplay in terms of the general engine you're trying to build up, in terms of the resources you have, in terms of your rotating wheel, and it's all completely a little foundation of just meanness going around the table as you sit there and say, hey, I wasn't even trying to be mean. It benefits me, so I had to. I'm sorry, I had to do it. You can sit there and look your opponents in the eye and be like, I'm so sorry, I know it hurts you, it wasn't my intention, it's just a thing that I have to do in order to benefit me. That's gonna be our number 7, Barrage. Before we move on to number 6, I'm going to thank our partner of this video, Mint Mobile. If you've been watching the channel long enough, you know that I've been using Mint Mobile for a very long time. When they reached out to partner with the channel, I jumped at the opportunity because I believe in what they're offering. They currently have their plans at $15 a month for unlimited talk and text and nationwide coverage. They bring all their plans right now down to that $15 a month, so you can try out and see which plan is right for you, signing up for a 3-month plan. After that, you can pivot or adjust based on your needs, but in general, their pricing is very competitive and hard to beat. You can check out obviously your local carrier, check out whatever you're currently using, but they currently offer a great service at a great price point. I highly recommend you check them out. It takes like 10 minutes to switch. It took me around 10 minutes to switch with no guidance, anything. Just pop in the website, enter your information, enter your phone number. It's incredibly easy to switch over. It's incredibly easy to see how much you'll save, and that's why they are a partner of the channel, because they offer a great service at a great price point. That's going to be Mint Mobile. Moving on to our number 6 over here, we have Azul. Azul, which I don't have on the table, but Azul is incredibly competitive and cutthroat, but specifically at the 2-player game. I think Azul is an excellent 2-player experience. I think it's a good game at higher player counts, but for me, Azul at 2 players is where the game shines. That is a game that you're basically trying to hate draft each other. That's why I love it at 2 players, because when you're playing at a higher player counts, you kind of have to go for your own points, and whatever happens, happens. But at 2 players, it stops becoming about how much I can score, and it starts becoming about how much I can score versus you, which is why the game can have these cutthroat moments where I'm like, oh, I know this will give me 8 points, but if I just take this, it'll give me 3 points, but it'll cause you to take 5 extra tiles, and you'll just tank by negative 12 points this round, which is delightfully good for me in terms of me trying to win. Azul at 2 players is cutthroat. It is cutthroat, it is arguably mean, but it's a delightful experience that the good news is because the game plays in 20 minutes at 2 players, you can just restart and go at it again. But if you want to see Azul played at an entirely different level than the 3 to 4 player game, dive into it at 2 players and stop focusing on how much you're scoring and start focusing on the discrepancy between the scores and see how the game plays out. Because of the fact that you have these negative points, because of the fact that you can force your opponent into bad draws, making sure that you see what is the best overall table structure is far more important than simply maximizing your score. It is a delightfully cutthroat experience. Highly recommend Azul. Our number 5 is actually a trio of games, because there's one game I'm going to have for today's video, but I'm going to specifically talk about 2 others that give me the exact same feeling, and that is Ragnarocks from Grey Fox Games. Ragnarocks is a game about trying to carve out your own landscape. Every single turn you move your Vikings and you create these little barriers around the board until you can eventually cut off and close off the largest areas, helping you score your areas. But it's all about trying to figure out how you're going to jump around the board, how you're going to position these barriers, and how you're going to stop your opponent's Vikings from being able to react and jump across the hexagonal board and getting into your zone. So the game is entirely about setting up these boundaries, setting up and being mindful of the lines of sight, and trying to ensure that you can have the largest terrain when all is said and done at the end of it. Mix into that asymmetric powers, and you have a variable experience in addition to a cutthroat experience. A game that plays in 10-15 minutes, but gives you such a competitive gameplay, such a again, cutthroat versus mean gameplay as you try to figure out not just how to win, but how to ensure that your opponent is completely stifled, because you need to shut them off. You need to cut them off at the knees and stop them from being able to actually survive, because if they can get into your terrain, they can continue to cause havoc, and it's not clear who will win. So the more you can force them into a little corral, the more you can keep them in a corner, the better off you will be. Ragnarocks is delightfully tense, delightfully cutthroat, and very variable thanks to the asymmetric powers. The 2 games I'm going to include in this general bundle over here are Hey, That's My Fish and Terra Nova. Both those are two other games that have the same core gameplay concept. Ragnarocks is my favorite of the three, primarily because of the asymmetric powers that keep the game fresh and interesting, but Hey That's My Fish and Terra Nova have that same tenseness of incredibly cutthroat gameplay that is incredibly strategically satisfying, but also fairly cutthroat. Moving on to my number 4 is Tigris Euprates. Tigris Euprates is a game of trying to build up your empire, trying to score as many points as possible because, well, there's 4 different ways to score points, or 4 different types of points you can score, and your score is the lowest of those 4 points. So you're trying to figure out how to build your empire, how to get a variable number of points, and just basically how to thrive when other players are merely just getting whatever they can get. You want to try to build these temples, score residual points, just trying to do your own thing. Except the game is going to have wars and revolts, and both of them can be incredibly nation dominating. I don't know the right word for it. They basically destroy everything your opponent has spent time building up towards. Because you can play it as plays best at 3 or 4 players in my opinion, but when you have a revolt, you basically start a little battle from inside someone else's kingdom. And when you have a war, you link kingdoms and see who has more support in one kingdom over the other. But usually the results of a revolt or a war, the results of either of these things, usually completely dominate and destroy whatever the other players have been working towards. And sure, there's lots of ways to pivot. You're not out if you lose a battle, but those battles are very key and they completely change the landscape of everything. Combine that with these little disaster tiles that can completely shape the landscape of the battlefield before you even get to the war, and the game has small but subtle plays that usually result in giant swings in terms of who's doing well and how the game is going. And that gameplay from Reina Knizia over here, arguably one of my favorite games from him, Tigris Euprates gives you incredibly strategic gameplay, lots of little modules and variances if you've got the most recent version, which has been out of print for a bit. I assume it'll be coming back in print at some point. It generally does. But past that, it's a great game. It's incredibly accessible, it's incredibly strategic, and it's also incredibly cutthroat. Number 3 is Cosmic Encounter. Cosmic Encounter is a negotiation game that involves you trying to get a presence on 5 different planets. You're trying to get colonies on 5 different planets, which results in every single time it's your turn, you're trying to figure out how to, move your planets off into space and shoot somewhere else into the galaxy. This results in battles in which you are going to invite other people at the table, but so is your defender, but that kind of results in an early game swing where everyone wants to be on the attacker side because, sure, there's rewards whichever side you go to, but if you join the attacker, you can also get a colony on the planet you're attacking, which is how the game starts to accelerate pretty quickly from the get-go. It means the first few turns of the game, you can start getting 2-3 colonies up before people start pulling back from inviting you, because now that you have 3 colonies, you're no longer an ally, you're a threat for the crown. And that gameplay aspect already has this nature of trying to get alliances at the table and trying to, in real time with everyone there, trying to convince everyone to join you or not join you and watch players shift their allegiances to try to figure out how it most favors them across the course of the game. That already starts off as cutthroat. But where it really escalates is the fact that in the game you can play negotiation cards. You can sit there in a battle, you against the opponent, and you can sit there and say, I know we have all these allies, I know we've called all these fleets across the galaxy to support us, but you and I can make a deal together. And when that deal is done, you can walk away, you can play negotiate, you can both play negotiate, and boom, you can both trade whatever you want, including colonies on each other's planet, completely undermining all the people who joined to those battles, and not just joined, but showed their allegiances to one side or the other. So you get all the cons that come with the fact that Jack now knows that Rachel's out to get him and is happy to go out and tank him, so all that's present, and Rachel didn't even benefit from the situation. Except that's not all. Because when I play a negotiation card, or when any player plays a negotiation card, if the other player plays anything that's not a negotiation card, they will win the battle. Which means you can sit there and try to convince somebody else who might have an overwhelming force. You can sit there and say, listen, let's negotiate. I'll give you better terms. I'll give you the strong card in my hand. We'll both trade colonies. It'll be good. It'll be good, and we can cut Rachel out of this battle because she's at 3 colonies. We cannot let her get to 4. And when you're done making those decisions, when you're done making those compromises and trades, you can sit there and turn around and play an attack card and someone else negotiate, and the whole battle is completely gone. When someone else trusted you and they shouldn't have, the entire landscape of the game changes, which makes Cosmic Encounter one of those games that really creates experiences. It creates stories, it creates experiences. It is incredibly fun when people agree and negotiate their way. You can even negotiate way to a shared victory, by the way, which is very cool. Not a lot of games let you do that. But that also means you have the potential to be in a moment when you can both share the victory and someone else can undercut the other person. And sometimes you do it because it's fun, and other times you do it because you didn't even have a negotiate card in your hand, and it was the only way to buy their trust, and let's just hope that you don't play Cosmic Encounter again for the next 4 months, because otherwise they'll remember this moment. Our number 2 is an incredibly cutthroat game. A game that you can lose on the first turn. The designer is famous for saying, if you can't lose the game on the first turn, why have a first turn? Why not just skip to the second turn? And that's Food Chain Magnate. Although I guess I grabbed the expansion set box over here, but Food Chain Magnate from Spotter. This is a game where you're trying to figure out your pathway towards the landscape of fast food. As you try to figure out how to slowly add, well, advertising, because you have to make customers want your food, then start production. You have to make your burgers, your pizza, your various drinks. You have to try to bring all that to the table. But then the problem is, this is a game that I describe as economic warfare. Because what happens is, if I get my burger chain growing, if I get it up and running, other players can try to undercut me, either by making more burgers, or by making cheaper burgers. Actually, cheaper burgers is more important than more burgers. Or they can just start heavily advertising pizza, because suddenly my opponents don't want my burgers. I'm making 20 burgers a turn. It doesn't matter, because no one in the neighborhood wants burgers anymore. You want Al's Pizza over there, because Al's Pizza has been advertised from every single billboard and overhead plane and the radio stations and everything. The game has such a high degree of trying to adapt to what other players are doing that it is inherently a cutthroat game. It is a game you want to get people into the game slowly. You want to train them in how the game operates, but once you do so, the end result is that people are sitting there learning the ins and outs of how to pivot and adapt their own economic structure, their own tableau, to try to figure out how to get ahead when everyone else is trying to survive in the same cutthroat landscape. You know all those value meals that you're trying to get from every restaurant right now, where McDonald's is offering a $5 value meal here, and Taco Bell's offering you whatever they're offering, and they're fighting. This is what this game is. It is real time, having players go at it, trying to figure out how do you survive when everyone is going after the same customers, and there's only so much buying that can actually happen in the game. It is a great simulation of actual, well, not like real simulation, but it's a good idea of simulation of how you might have to adapt to a landscape in a real life situation, although again, with caveats, it's not exactly like that. But then it's also an incredibly cutthroat strategic experience in which you can lose in the first turn, but play with people who are going to help make it so that you don't lose in the first turn, but rather they can kind of guide you through optimal first turns, figure your way into it, and then go at it and see who survives. And my number one cutthroat game, and this might be a personal choice, I think lots of people might consider Fuce Magna higher, but you have to have played both to have an opinion here. But my number one most cutthroat game is Paris La Cité Lumière. I love this game. From Devere Games, not only do I love it, but I love it and it's incredibly cutthroat. This is a game that goes into two parts. This is going to be the first phase of the game where you try to create the landscape. You're creating the landscape of the board, deciding which tiles go in which areas, and also drafting polyominoes to place. Now the important part is, as you draft these polyominoes, you're working on a somewhat shared landscape, which means you need to figure out who's going to be able to get their polyominoes onto the board first. Because take too much and you're in trouble, because you will lose negative points. Well, you'll lose points. You'll have negative points for every polyomino tile you don't place. But you're trying to figure out just how you can visualize the landscape and how you can get there first so you can place better than your opponent. But then in the second phase of the game, you're going into the placement, but also special abilities. So the first phase is creating the board and drafting polyominoes. The second phase, once the first phase is done, is there's 8 special towers that are out, and each player can use up to 4 of the special powers, or you can place a polyomino. And the decision to grab a special power or place a polyomino is always going to be incredibly key in the game as you try to figure out the right ways to place down polyominoes that are going to get you scoring points compared to your opponent, not just in the points you get from placement, but in the lack of negative points you get from not being able to place it at all. The game requires you to be able to adapt. The game requires you to get these small little tiles and look for the moments and the spots and the openings on the board where your opponent is planning on placing that giant polyomino that's going to score them 14 points, and then seeing how you can undercut them, and maybe you only score 4 or 5 points from that placement, but you stop them from scoring. You lock off any ability for them to place the game. Being able to play this game, when you first start playing this game, you won't see those patterns quite as much. But by the time you get to your third or fourth play, you'll start to realize that it's not just, similar to what I talked about with Azul, it's not just about how you can score as many points as possible, it's about how you can undercut and deny your opponent from being able to score points, and trying to solve for that difference while you use the variety of the board placement, the polyominoes you've drafted, the knowledge of the polyomino tiles they have, and then the special tiles, all trying to combine nicely into a little game in which you're trying to place polyominoes and do a nice little peaceful scoring of the Cité of Paris, but you're doing so while trying to mess over your opponent left, right, and center. That's going to be my list of my top 10 most cutthroat games. Again, for me, the game experiences had to be incredibly enjoyable. That's part of what put them on this list for me. Games like Tammany Hall, like Dominant Species, are games where I didn't necessarily feel as much of the enjoyment, but I felt a lot more of the suffering or agony of things not going well. For me, these are all games where I've been on the losing side of the cutthroatness and still appreciated and enjoyed the experience I was having, and that's why these are my top 10. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Let me know in a comment down below what your most cutthroat game is, and as always, I hope you have a good one.